This year it'll be 650 years since Julian of Norwich received her revelations, and I've been reading them for 50 of them, ever since I was put on the committee to celebrate her 600th anniversary in 1973. And I was put on that committee as a punishment. You see, you all know that Norwich now has 32 surviving medieval churches. And back in those days, they just decided to deconsecrate nearly all of them and turn them over to suitable secular uses. And I was horrified, because I've always found that when you're in church and your mind wanders, you've only got to look up, and suddenly all the angels on the roof are singing with you, and you're surrounded by the prayers of all the people who prayed there over the centuries. And so I wrote a fighting article attacking it in the local paper. Next morning, the telephone rang. It was Alan Webster, the Dean of Norwich and my neighbour in the close. "Sheila," he said, "since you're so keen on prayer, perhaps you'd like to serve on a committee." It was to celebrate the 600th anniversary. Now, some of you may not be old enough to remember what was happening in the 1970s, but I can tell you that back then, the times, they were a-changing. The Book of Common Prayer, that bedrock of Anglicanism, was being replaced by things called Rite A, Rite B, Series 1, Series 2. And if you turned up in church at 11 o'clock expecting matins, as usual, you might find yourself involved in something called Sung Eucharist, where everyone knew that communion belonged at the early service at 8 o'clock. Nuns were nervously appearing in newly bought secular clothes, and the Latin Mass, so we'd heard, was now being celebrated not in Latin at all, but in the language of whatever country you happened to be in at the time. Yes, the times, they were a-changing. There was even talk of women priests. Well, I was cautiously in favour of it. So when I turned up at that first committee meeting and found that the dear old CLE was proposing to celebrate some woman who'd spent all her life in one room in the Middle Ages, I was shocked. It somehow didn't seem meaningful or relevant. Then I went away and read her book. I've been reading it ever since. What happened next was that Michael McLean, who I'd met on the committee, was appointed rector of St. Julian's. Now, he believed an anchorite cell needed an anchorite, and so he asked a retired priest, Robert Llewellyn, to come and pray in the cell. Now, it wasn't long before Robert Llewellyn realised that something like a menu was needed to show people what a rich feast awaited them in Julian's book. And so he compiled a little book of daily readings. We were all delighted when we heard that it was going to be published on the 8th of May, 1980. Now, Robert had taken the extracts from the only edition available at that time, Penguin's edition by Clifton Walters. And the publishers at the last moment rang and said they couldn't get copyright clearance in time. The only way to get it on time was to make our own translation. So I thought, "You could do it," said Robert. "Robert, I was hopeless at Middle English," I said. He said nothing. Hoping to buy time, I said, "When do you want it exactly?" "Next Thursday," he said. "But Robert, that's 8 days." "I have to post it on Wednesday," he said calmly. So that's how I came to translate Enfolded in Love, the little book that's now gone on to sell something like 500,000 copies. I did it because Robert Llewellyn understood that whatever you bring to God, he can transform it, even if it's only 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. Well, after that, They asked Michael McLean to write a simple book about Julian because there was nothing of the sort at that time. He pushed the job onto me, and so I had to set off in search of Julian of Norwich. That first edition has been in print for nearly 35 years now, and I've learned quite a lot since then. This new edition brings you up to date with the discoveries I've made since then. I've been reading Julian of Norwich for 50 years now, and it's taken that length of time for me to discover that all the time I thought I was in search of Julian of Norwich, she's been in search of me and of all her fellow Christians. It's a delight to look round now and see how many of us she's found.